Member for the Western Arctic.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm pleased to have my opportunity to speak on this. I'll be sharing my time with the member from Winnipeg Centre. And of course, we're speaking to a motion that says, in the opinion of the House, the government should not make a decision on the proposed takeover of Nexen by CNOOC without conducting thorough public consultations. And these accessible public hearings should be on the issue of foreign ownership in the Canadian energy sector with a reference to state-owned enterprises. Mr. Speaker, so far in the debate, what I've learned from the government side is that in terms of policy and direction on this, they're simply not there. They don't have the capacity to make a decision that's in the public interest because they haven't the policies that allow them to analyze public interest. Mr. Speaker, in this world today, state-owned enterprises are the norm in the energy sector across the world, whether it's Mexico, Norway, Brazil, Venezuela. In fact, most of the OPEC countries, what we have is 75% of all oil resources are under the control of states worldwide. This is the reality of the oil and gas industry today. Only 7% of all oil and gas reserves are in countries that have a free rein on investment in oil and gas. So quite clearly, Canada is an exception, and it's especially an exception among energy exporting countries. I think of all the major energy exporting countries, Canada is the only one that allows a free rein on investment. So what we have, Mr. Speaker, is a situation in which Canada is not lined up with the rest of the world. We must explain why our system, our competitive system, as we've heard the conservatives describe it, is going to work going forward for our children and grandchildren. 13 top oil companies in terms of reserves are state-owned. This game is afoot around the world. And where's Canada? Stuck in the mud. What's the feeling in Canada about energy? The general feeling, the general agreement, whether it's the premiers, whether it's the industry itself, is that we need a national energy strategy. And in fact, right across the country, there's a great deal of concern that we don't have one. This has been a situation that has been facing these Conservatives for the last 6 years of their time in government. And they've stonewalled on it, Mr. Speaker. They have done nothing. It would be easier to support ownership of any kind if there was a Canadian agreement on the maximizing of benefits from our non-renewable and finite energy sources. These are non-renewable. These are finite. When we take them out of the country, we have less in the country, not more. So the bank account is being depleted as we speak with our resources. What is the net benefit to Canadians from that? In the absence of a national energy strategy, how well does the laissez-faire approach work? How well is it working in those very oil sands that we're talking about today? I think you can safely say it's been characterized by a chaotic and uncertain approach that jumps from one idea to the next. There's no control, no understanding of the environmental impacts of the oil sands. In fact, the major agencies that were set up to study them, industries turned their backs on them themselves, said they won't work. Take upgrading bitumen, a big component in the oil sands, a big part of the money and the benefits that can be made by Canadians. In 2007, the industry was prepared to upgrade all the oil in Canada. They were prepared to invest $100 billion in upgrading. How much are they ready to do today? Nothing. There is no upgrading capacity that is moving forward today in Canada. So we've lost that. Why did industry change so rapidly? What is it about our system that allows that kind of chaotic behavior? There's a lack of effective research. If you look at the numbers, the research in the oil sands is far smaller than it is in most other aspects of the international energy scene. Why is that? When we know that the issues around the development of the oil sands are complex, and they're getting complex the deeper we go in the ground. All you had to do was go to a breakfast that was held here in Ottawa before the summer break, when the professor from the University of Calgary explained it very clearly what's going to happen as they dig deeper into the oil sands and how much more difficult that's going to become. What about the direction for markets? We're proposing a pipeline to the United States to upgrade the bitumen in old refineries down there that were designed for Venezuelan heavy oil. And in fact, BP right now got turned down on one of their licenses to operate one of those upgraders in the United States because it didn't meet environmental standards. So that's one idea that we've had. The other idea now is to market it in China, in the Far East, through the Gateway Pipeline, opposed by most every person along that route. But also taking raw bitumen, taking it to China. At the same time, we're going to take liquefied natural gas to China. We're going to combine them there in an upgrader. Now, how does that work for Canada? We have an industry with real problems, with public relations problems of the extreme. With sale of product we can't manage, and we can't maximize the return on investments. We are squandering our resources on quick and dirty action in those oil sands. That's what's happening. So, how can we make a decision today as Canadians about the value of developing or transferring the ownership of one Canadian company to a state-owned enterprise in China, when we don't have a plan that we can point to the people that are taking over this industry and say, this is what we want you to accomplish if you come into our country. This is how we want you to develop our country. It isn't there. How about our neighbors in the United States? What do they think about this? There's bipartisan horror at the idea of turning over 1.3 million acres of Gulf of Mexico oil leases to the Chinese. Why is that? Because the U.S. understands the nature of offshore oil leasing. They understand that their goal in their country is to develop the resources so that they are energy independent. They know that very well. Why are they standing up on this? That is why they're standing up. They're standing up for the interests of the United States. Mr. Speaker, I brought up the matter 2 weeks ago about the leases in the Arctic. We just gave up a lease in the Arctic over 900,000 square hectares to a company with almost no assets, a company that we knew was going to turn around and sell it to someone else, maybe the Russians, maybe the Koreans, maybe the Chinese who have icebreakers and deep-sea drilling capacity. Why not? Does our minister even have the power to say no to a transfer? No, he doesn't. Under the Canadian Petroleum Products Act that governs northern petroleum development, he doesn't have the ability to say no to a transfer. Right across this country, we're failing our children and our grandchildren with our laissez-faire approach to an industry, to an energy source that right around the world, countries that are standing up for themselves are taking advantage of Canada. Right around the world, that's what's happening. And where's Canada? Without a strategy, without a direction, flailing in the wind. Mr. Speaker, this is a terrible thing to have to say in this Parliament, but here we have a chance to change it. Conservatives get on side, start holding public hearings on these issues that are so important to us. This can make a difference. Stand up for Canada. Make a difference.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm and I'm sure many people on this side of the House are shocked with the intervention that they just heard from the honourable member. Apparently, Hugo Chavez has got the energy industry, energy exporting figured out, and Canada's not there yet. Apparently, we should be Venezuela. But I challenge the member, and I challenge his colleagues, to point to another country where its nation's citizens benefit more from its resources than Canada. Billions of dollars are being contributed each and every year to a public health care system. Billions of dollars are being contributed each and every year to a public education system. The member mentioned that Canada's energy resources are finite. There is so much oil in Canada's oil sands. If they doubled production today, they would be harvesting oil for 180 years from Canada's oil sands. That's a fact. But I'll tell you something else, Mr. Speaker, and this is one of the most disturbing things that the NDP has not indicated. Are they in favour of nationalizing Canada's energy program? Is that what I'm hearing? Would they like to push out shareholder-owned companies with pension funds that this member's constituents and indeed the constituents of every member of the NDP would be invested into? Are they in favour of taking that over and pushing out those investors that benefit from Canada's energy resources as well as every single Canadian?
The honourable member for the Western Arctic.
Mr. Speaker, when I spoke about a national energy strategy, that was one that was supported by the premiers, including Premier Redford from Alberta, the oil industry. We're not talking about nationalization here. We're talking about standing up for Canadian interests. And that's why everybody's lined up except these Conservatives. What is wrong with your ideological approach? Get rid of it. Start thinking pragmatically about what's important for Canada. When you do that, industry will follow you, the provinces will follow you, and everyone will be extremely grateful. When you continue to stonewall proper action for the sake of Canadian future in the energy industry and in energy generally, you're doing all of us a disservice.
Before I go to questions and comments, remind all honourable members to direct their questions and comments to the chair rather than to their colleagues. Questions and comments, the honourable member for Davenport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his eloquence in standing up for Canada on this important file, and I think all members would agree that Canadians generally are concerned about a deal that puts a key part of our energy sector in the hands of another state. And this particular company's 65% is owned by China itself, by the state. Surely members on the other side have heard from constituents who are concerned, because we know that about 70% of Canadians have real concerns about this deal for a number of different reasons. And I'd like my honourable colleague to maybe elaborate on some of those reasons why 70% of Canadians have real concerns about this deal.
The honourable member for the Western Arctic.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think quite clearly right across the country there's a profound recognition about the nature of energy. That has occurred over the last decade. That's part of all of our psyches right now. We understand how important energy is, how much it's going to lead in the future, almost every issue going. Now we have the situation of a country that likely is going to be one of the strongest economies in the future, is moving very rapidly in that direction, a country that needs the resources for itself, that is going around the world now and making strategic investments in resources in many countries. And without dealing with that country in a positive and strong fashion, without laying out to that country or any other agency or any other business or any other part of the industry, without giving them a very clear understanding of what they're getting into when they invest in Canada, we are really leaving ourselves short. We don't know what the Chinese will accomplish, but they won't accomplish what we want unless we lay that out clearly for everyone to understand and put some weight behind it as a country, as a nation, the way we can and should. Thank you.